Hello, everyone. Welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Thursday, July 18th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we are going to try to scientifically determine the best blockbuster of summer 1996. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
All right, Brad, just to be completely candid with you, I didn't really have any plan for what today's podcast episode would be. So I was trying to figure out what could we talk about, what could we do, and I was looking back at the movies of 1996 because Twisters comes out tonight slash tomorrow, and
Yes.
Twister came out in the summer of 1996, and I was looking at that summer and was kind of amazed at the breadth of options that moviegoers had. I wrote down a bunch of movies that I'm going to list here. And I thought what we could do on today's episode is try to narrow down a few contenders for what we think the actual best blockbuster of the year could be, and then judge those movies against each other based on some criteria that we're going to lay out. So that's kind of the plan, the loose plan for what we're going to do here. We're very much like making this up as we go on the fly today. So if the podcast is a little bit more, I don't know, loosey goosey and weird than usual, that's why. But I want to read this list of titles to you, Brad, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 20 movies here, so forgive me for just like listing films, but try to put yourself back in 1996, that period where you and I were both about the same age. We were like, whatever, 10, 11, 12, somewhere in that range,
Yeah.
watching movies all the time and going to the theater a lot. And
Eating Dunkaroos.
yes, absolutely. And just crushing Capri Sun. Yeah, the whole deal. Very 90s. So these are the movies that came out in the summer of 1996. Twister, Mission Impossible, Spy Hard, Dragonheart, The Phantom, The Rock, The Cable Guy, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Eraser, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Nutty Professor, Striptease, Independence Day, John Travolta's Phenomenon, Harriet the Spy, Courage Under Fire, Kazam with Shaquille O'Neal, Multiplicity with Michael Keaton, The Frighteners, directed by Peter Jackson, Train Spotting, A Time to Kill, Joe's Apartment, Chain Reaction, starring Keanu Reeves and Rachel Weisz, Matilda, Escape from LA, Jack, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, The Fan, Tin Cup, The Island of Dr. Moreau, A Very Brady Sequel, and First Kid. What is your reaction to just hearing the fact that all of those movies came out in one summer, Brad?
So it's interesting that we're doing this because just recently, I recorded an episode of my Saturday Night Live podcast, the 10 to 1 podcast, because during the summer we've been focusing on the movies of Saturday Night Live in between seasons. And so we just did Night at the Roxbury, and that came out in 1998. And I went and looked back at like the roster of movies that came out around the time that Night at the Roxbury did, and also just that year. And it's a similarly stacked list of a variety of movies. Like, it wasn't just big blockbuster action movies that dominated. Of course, those have always been part of summer, but like there used to be so many more big comedies, both for adults and for families. Just really big movies with big casts that, you know, weren't tied to some major franchise or anything like that. There were just a lot bigger swings in the summer. And so when I saw this, I was like, yeah, man, the 90s felt like a haven of big movies every single summer, with like where there was a big variety too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking at this list and three titles jumped out at me, which is Matilda, First Kid, and Harriet the Spy. And it feels like that genre of like, I don't know, even know what you would call that, like kid adventure movies, I guess is maybe how you could classify them. That just feels like completely gone. Like now we have animated movies that are intended for children. But like there was that whole, I feel like the 90s was like a boom period for those kid adventure movies that just really aren't made anymore. Can you think of like the last time that there were, I don't know, that there was even one movie like that?
I mean, like the closest I think we've come in recent years is like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or like Alexander and the Terrible No Good Very Bad Day. I guess If is a pretty recent example, but they're so few and far between, and there used to be like at least one every month, if not more. You know, like that's why I say, like, I remember the 90s being such a haven because there were so many movies that like were geared towards kids, but also still, you know, functioned for adults on some level as well. And those are just gone now, especially in the live action arena.
Yeah, the one that came to my mind was The Kid Who Would Be King, which came out in 2019. It was it Joe Cornish, I think, the same guy who did Attack the Block, wrote and directed that one. So yeah, it's just kind of like, it makes me sad a little bit to look back at this list and think about the types of movies that used to be really commonplace in theaters that we just don't really have very much anymore. Or if they do, they're like streaming movies, or they don't hold the same special place in the culture as they once did.
Yeah, exactly.
But man, that list is very impressive. So we're obviously not going to go through like every single one of these movies. We're trying
Oh
to
no.
determine we're trying to determine the best blockbuster of 1996. So, or of summer 1996 anyway. So
So before we do that, let's do like at least like a little bit of a breakdown of like the ones that we won't make the cut, but the ones that hold a special place in our heart.
okay, yeah. Anything jump out at you on this list?
So one that definitely jumps out to me is The Phantom with Billy
Oh yeah.
Zane. Oh
Hmm.
man, I love this movie because it's like it feels like it's in the same vein of Dick Tracy. It's so cheesy and hokey, and like Billy Zane is perfect in this character. You also have Treat Williams, who is outstanding as Xander Drax,
Yep.
beginning and ends with X. The plot with the skulls like makes no sense whatsoever, but I love like the old school adventure style of this movie because it feels like Rocketeer, and like
Yeah.
I really dug that stuff when I was a kid. So yeah, that's I will acknowledge that that is fully a dumb bad movie, but I love it.
Yeah, me too. I actually had, you remember how the Phantom has this skull ring that he wears?
Oh yeah,
I somehow found one of those somewhere at like some,
nice.
I don't know, Spencer's Gifts or something when I was a kid. And oh, you better believe I bought that and wore it
I would
around
buy
all
one
the
of those
time.
today. In fact, I'm after we're done with this, I'm gonna go look and see if I can find one.
Okay, so yeah, I mentioned Harriet the Spy. I remember loving that movie as a kid. Like
Yeah,
my sister and I bonded over that movie. I read the book and everything, and was really taken by that story, and thought that was a great little adventure film for kids. Dragonheart is, I don't think we're probably not gonna be talking about that one in any depth. But Sean Connery voicing a dragon, I remember being like thinking that was incredibly cool at the time.
yeah.
That movie probably doesn't hold up super well, like visual effects wise or anything. But what else jumps out at
uh,
you from this list?
I have an affinity for a very Brady sequel and the Brady Bunch movie because I do think that they function as a great love letter to the Brady Bunch, which is something I grew up watching with my parents because they loved it.
Mhm.
And it does a good job of being both a parody and like paying tribute to that show because there's a lot of really like Easter egg sort of references and like very specific points of reference to the show that they actually brought into the movie. And so that was something I always enjoyed as a kid.
Mhm.
I also want to give a shout out to Jack, the Robin Williams movie, where he plays a kid who has this ailment where he appears to be much older than he actually is, and I feel like
This movie is so bad.
this movie's off, yeah, so often considered a misfire, but like I really like what Robin Williams does with his performance, and like I appreciate like the big swing that it takes of like seeming like it's supposed to be this big comedy, but it does have like some good heart to it. And like there's things that are weird about it that don't quite make sense, but like the fact that this is a Francis Ford Coppola movie, and I genuinely think Robin Williams is great in the movie. He really like just like captures the spirit of a kid in an adult's body, and without tapping into like a lot of the tropes that you would expect from like something like a body switch comedy or something like that.
Mhm.
I yeah, it's something that has I've always like kind of just like really appreciated on a level, even if I acknowledge that like it's not a perfect movie by any means.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that like I loved Matilda. I still love Matilda.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great one. Kazam, I loved as a kid and rewatched like I don't know 8 or 9 years ago and was like, Jesus, this is
Oh, it's bad.
terrible.
It's real
So,
bad. Real bad.
all right. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's try to narrow down. I think we were talking a little bit before we started recording of like,
Oh, real quick, I
oh
want to
yeah.
remind people how dark First Kid is.
Mm. I don't
Uh,
remember it being dark. I remember there's a scene where there's like virtual reality in a mall. I remember that because
yes,
it was like
yes.
kind of novel at the time. I remember Sinbad playing a Secret Service agent who is tasked with um, protecting this kind of shithead son of the president, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really remember anything dark. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the kid's a bit of a brat in the movie, and it's because like he's bullied for being the president's kid and whatnot, and so that kind of sucks. But there's this secret service agent played by Timothy Busfield who's kind of a dick to the kid too, and he gets fired because he doesn't do his job well, and like something goes wrong, and it's basically the kid's fault in so many ways because he did something he wasn't supposed to, and it gets him fired. And so Timothy Busfield's character comes back and kidnaps the kid for revenge and like takes him by gunpoint in the mall and is planning to kill him
Wow.
in the mall, and Sinbad has to like save him and retrieve him. It's like holy crap, this took a turn.
Yeah, they definitely would not put kids in that much peril in a mainstream movie today. I don't think. I mean, I feel like I've read interviews with current filmmakers, modern filmmakers who have tried to pitch stories like that where kids are in danger, and like studios and streamers even sometimes will be like, yeah, that's kind of a hard line for us. We can't really tell stories like that right now. So yeah, man, very, very of its time, First Kid. But I remember it being a pretty fun movie, actually. I'm surprised it had that darkness to it, but
Yeah, it is still very fun because of Sinbad and like the dynamic with the kid and whatnot. But yeah, like when I rewatched it when I was older, I was like, wow, this takes a pretty big turn.
Okay, so yeah, I think we were talking beforehand, and we kind of narrowed it down to, well, let's call it 6 movies. We'll see how many actually end up in our true contender list. But let's say Twister, Mission Impossible, The Rock, Independence Day, The Nutty Professor, and The Cable Guy as like the 6 dominant contenders for the best summer blockbuster of 1996. And I think it might be fun to try to pit these movies against each other in some sort of vaguely scientific way. And by that, I mean, we'll have 4 categories that we'll try to judge these movies by. So one of them is like the satisfying plot. Like, does this movie sort of scratch all the itches that you want it to, on a plot level and a story level? Another one is like a jaw-dropping set piece. If it, maybe we could like sort of pit those set pieces against each other and see which one might be more impressive or more interesting or something. The supporting cast, which I think is always like a fun sort of like wild card scenario in movies like this, because like, the movie is being sold on the big stars, but like, what can it do to surprise you with the supporting cast? That's always like a fun aspect of this. And then finally, the last thing would be like the 1996-iness of these movies. If we can, and by the way, we have not revisited any of these like specifically for this episode, so we're mostly like going off the dome here and just relying on our memories to treat us well and hopefully get us through this.
But I will say 5 out of these 6 movies, like I have watched. I watched repeatedly on like video when I was younger, and I have seen most of them fairly recently.
Okay, that's good. All right, excellent. Well, you'll hopefully be holding us up on, when it comes to like certain details and stuff like that. So, all right, with the table properly set, let's take a break and then we'll come back and actually try to put this into practice. All right, Brad, let's get into it. So, how do you want to do this? I don't know. Honestly, like I have not seen The Cable Guy ever all the way through. I think I've seen some scenes of it, but I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. So
Man.
I'm not going to be real useful when it comes to trying to make a legitimate case for this. So I don't know if you want to just like sort of say your piece about The Cable Guy and then we can move on to other things, or what?
I mean, this one's not going to end up being the one that is the top dog. Like I'll get that out of the way right now. But I included this and Nutty Professor because they feel like 2 like comedies, like big kind of comedies that really like matched as far as like anticipation and excitement for a blockbuster summer. And like we don't get a lot of these big comedies anymore unless they're tied to some kind of established IP. Like we could easily call Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem a comedy because it's very funny and it's a great movie and has great animation, but it's tied to this established IP. We're not getting stuff like Knocked Up or Anchorman anymore. And so like I think that this is the 90s is even more evident of a time when there were a lot more of these comedies, and Cable Guy and Nutty Professor were 2 very big comedies from that year that were considered big enough to come out in the summer. Now, Cable Guy ended up being more of a disappointment because it's a dark comedy and it takes a little more of a serious turn than people were expecting from Jim Carrey at this point in his career, because he was massive at this point. This followed The Mask and Dumb and Dumber and Batman Forever, and so like he was riding high, and this was the first movie where like he got one of like I think it was the biggest paycheck of his career up to that point, and it was like a huge amount of money, and it actually ended up being a problem for the movie in the end because it didn't end up making a lot of money back at the box office because it wasn't exactly what people were expecting. But it's a really like fun, dark performance by Jim Carrey that still has his playfulness. Matthew Broderick is great in it. You've got Leslie Mann as his, somewhat estranged ex-girlfriend. Owen Wilson plays a phenomenal douchebag in a bit part. You have this underlying thing that adds like the social commentary where Ben Stiller is playing the Menendez brothers, who are on trial. Or one of them is on trial for killing the other one, and like it's tied to the real case. I forget what the name is of the real brothers who like were caught up in like 90s court drama that was like all over hard
I thought
copy
that
and stuff
was
like
their
that.
actual last
Was
name,
it?
but I thought so. But yeah, I'm not sure.
It's pretty close to that. And there's like Jack Black's in it, and Bob Odenkirk has a bit part, and so like there's just all these appearances by people who were like friends of Ben Stiller who were also comedic actors, but they hadn't really come into their own as big names yet.
Hmm.
But I really like Cable Guy. It has some fun moments, like the medieval times scene is a memorable one, with Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey. Yeah, so like I wanted to mention Cable Guy because it just feels like it's a strange kind of movie, and it's up there, and it's the kind of movie that probably today it would like either end up on streaming or like even be like at a film festival or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what about The Nutty Professor? This is one that I saw in theaters at the time, but I don't think I've revisited since. I remember liking it in '96, but I don't know, this era of Eddie Murphy where he plays multiple characters and like really goes all out when it comes to creating these multiple comic personas. I think I don't know. I was much more on that wavelength at age, whatever it was, 11, 10, 11, 12 or whatever, than I am now. So
Yeah.
what are your memories of this one?
For me, this one still works because there's a little bit of datedness to it because it's Eddie Murphy making comedy out of playing a character who's in a fat suit, but they do make you like sympathetic to him, and like I feel like it works on a level of like the movie comes around to the idea of like the character is embraced, and it's he's not always like a walking punchline. The family makes that a little bit less excusable because like it's all based around the fact that like they're very inappropriate and there's fart jokes, stuff like that. But the way Eddie Murphy plays it in this first one, I still enjoy it. I think it's still pretty funny, that the dynamic between all the characters and how they were able to make him like bounce off one another without feeling like you could see the seams was done really well. And the alternate persona that Eddie Murphy's Professor Sherman Klump has, it's just obnoxious Eddie Murphy, as if he were running around, in the 90s being just a total asshole. And but there's a great sequence where he squares off with Dave Chappelle, who's playing a stand-up comedian named Reggie, and like he basically roasts him, and that's a really fun moment as well. But like this was like another one of those where it was a really big comedy, and seeing Eddie Murphy do this on this level for the because he'd played multiple characters in movies like Coming to America and stuff before, but this was the first time where like the supporting characters played by him were also a really big part of the story. And it definitely devolves in a big step down when they do the sequel, The Clumps, and like
Mhm.
this the shtick definitely got old as he started to do things like Norbit and well, there's another one that he played multiple characters. I forget what it was. Um,
God,
Not Bowfinger,
The
because
Adventures
Bowfinger's
of
good.
Pluto Nash, was it?
I'm not sure if he did multiple characters in that one, but there was
Mm.
another one like Norbit where he played. But yeah, but I think Nutty Professor is still pretty solid when it comes to big summer comedies. So like
Okay.
yeah,
All right. So yeah, I don't know when it comes to like the best summer blockbuster, and you've got movies like Independence Day and The Rock and Mission Impossible and Twister in the mix. Part of me feels like The Nutty Professor and The Cable Guy just don't really stand a chance,
oh for sure,
when it comes to it. So I'm glad we were able to talk about them and especially point out like how important comedies used to be. But I think really it kind of comes down to these four, right? Do you agree with me on that?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I don't know how we're going to do this. This is fun. We're doing this in real time. All right. We talked about, let's talk about Twister first. We talked about this movie fairly recently on the podcast. We've revisited it in the lead up to the new film. I interviewed Jan de Bont on the podcast a little while back. Do you want to try to assign number values when we're talking about these four categories that we're looking for here, or I don't know, like does that make sense for like satisfying plot? Is it like a 9 out of 10 or something? And then we can talk about like the set piece and the cast and stuff and try to assign a number to it. I don't know. What do you think?
Sure, let's give that a shot.
Okay. All right. So the plot of Twister, kind of a ridiculous movie, but I think in their own way, a lot of these movies that we're going to be talking about are fairly ridiculous. So I don't know. was very satisfied when I watched this film most recently. So I would kind of say like I'm leaning toward like 9 out of 10 range here. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that that is a solid assessment. It is, yeah, it's a simple premise of what they're trying to do, and you have like the threat, which is always like the tornado that they have to embrace in order to get what they need. So yeah, I feel like, and plus they tie in the the struggling romance that might still have some gas left in the tank
Mhm.
along with it. And so, yeah, mixing those two together, I think it makes for a pretty satisfying plot.
Okay, actually, let's do that. Let's go through the plot of all of them. So, Mission Impossible. I remember there being a lot of discussion about how the first Mission Impossible movie, which is the one we're talking about here, was like very confusing for audiences at the time. And I think on rewatch, maybe just because modern blockbusters have become so convoluted, it didn't really seem super confusing to me. But also, maybe it's because I've seen the movie a bunch of times at this point. But I was also pretty satisfied by this one. So, I don't know. What do you think the number should be for Mission Impossible?
I think for Mission Impossible, it's also a nine because I remember when I was younger being somewhat confused by what is meant to be the reveal of John Voight being the bad guy, and I imagine this is where some other people got caught up too. Is like maybe they weren't really sure if what we're seeing is meant to like show that John Voight was actually the one behind it, and like this was all what he really did, or if it was just Tom Cruise trying to piece it together if that were actually what happened.
Mm,
And so I think that's where like the confusion comes into play. But I think this is a great because it sets up in the same way that like the new Mission Impossible movies do is it gives the team an impossible mission to accomplish and it lays out all the pieces and then you watch it either go right or how it goes wrong and unfold. And so um at its core it's just about retrieving and then getting back the knock list of agents
hmm
that is stolen. And then trying to find out who killed Ethan's team since it wasn't
Yeah.
him and he's considered a mole. So yeah, plot. I give this one a nine as well.
All right, The Rock. This is tough because do we give The Rock a 10 out of 10 when it comes to satisfying plot? Like, this movie kind of slaps, right? So, I don't know. Is there anything that The Rock could have done plot wise differently that would have made it improve in your eyes?
No, I mean it's up there.
It's such a simple again, a simple premise just executed at like an incredibly impressive degree. And yeah, let's just go ahead and give this a 10 and move on to Independence Day, which is a little bit of a shaggier movie. I think The Rock like really works because it's pretty laser focused. I mean, it has a couple different plot lines, but for the most part everything is zooming toward an inevitable conflict, right? And Independence Day feels like those plot lines are much more further afield, and then they all come together at the very end of the movie. But it's yeah, like I said, a little bit of a shaggier experience. So, what would you say about the number we should give to the plot for Independence Day?
I initially I thought we should probably give it a nine only because I've always been frustrated by their solution to like how to win in the end because it doesn't quite make sense.
Give them the virus, you mean the
Yeah,
alien, the
yeah,
mothership? Yeah,
like there's no reason why it would be easy for our computer system to integrate into theirs and for us
right.
to know how to upload a computer virus into an alien ship's database. But like at the same time, it's nothing that's any more ridiculous than what happens in The Rock. So so maybe Independence Day also gets a 10.
Jesus, wow, we're really going for it. All right, let's do it. Let's see what happens. We'll see how this all shakes out. The science is really strong here, folks. So, all right, let's go back to the jaw-dropping set piece. What would you say the biggest set piece in Twister is? There are a lot of like really cool moments, but I don't know if there's like one that really stands out to me. Maybe the very end when they're strapped to the metal and almost getting sucked up into the tornado at the very very end of the movie. But I don't know, is there one that jumps out to you that is more impressive?
Um, I would say, yeah. I mean, this wouldn't be the part where like they're in the tornado, but I think that the chase when leading up to them being in the tornado, when everything that's in the truck, I think is big set piece stuff because like they drive a truck through a house,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's rolling across a street. So I think that's a pretty big one. The drive-in sequence is also a pretty great sequence too. Just visually watching a tornado tear apart a drive-in screen as The Shining is being projected on it is very cool as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then no one has forgotten, when they encounter the two water spouts and the cow being
Yeah.
blown across. So like that, there's plenty here.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll say like the truck chase or maybe the cow moment. I think that those might be like the sort of standout moments, I guess, when you're looking at this movie. Mission Impossible, I think it's probably fair to say that the CIA uh, heist sequence, like stealing the knock list out of the CIA, like that set piece is pretty incredible. I did a whole oral history of that. If you're just listening to the podcast
Yeah.
recently, go back and check that out. There's some really cool stories about the making of that scene.
Langley
That's got to
Heist
be
is
the
good. Yeah, that's probably the big one. I mean, the helicopter and train stuff is solid too. And then this is more of a moment than it really is like a, but it is a jaw dropping set piece. Is the fact that they actually blew up that aquarium restaurant
yeah,
and Tom
yeah,
Cruise ran from that huge gush of water. Like they really did that. So
that's true. All right, I'm writing these down. We'll see if this comes into play at the end here of our conversation. The Rock, the biggest set piece in The Rock, or the most impressive, or the most. I mean, we have it written down as jaw-dropping set piece, but really it can kind of be formed to whatever we need it to be for the purposes of this conversation. So, there's that big chase scene in San Francisco, right? Where
mm-hmm.
it's been a while since I've seen The Rock, but I remember that being sort of like a precursor to the ridiculousness that Michael Bay gets into with like Bad Boys 2, for example. And then there's also like, there's a lot of action with Nick Cage and like the those green balls of like the poisonous gas and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a moment that jumps out at you as like the set piece of the movie?
Unfortunately, this is the one that I have seen the least recently, and it's been so long that like trying to pinpoint, and it's also one that I've seen I think probably the fewest amount of times too. So I'm bad with this one.
Yeah, I'm thinking like I remember Ed Harris's character sends a rocket toward the city, and there being a lot of tension built into whether or not this rocket is actually going to make contact with the land, and like there's a lot of action going on and cross cutting and stuff. So like that maybe the answer here for the set piece, just because neither one of us has seen this movie in a long time. It's been like 10 or 15 years since I've seen The Rock, so I really need to brush up on this one. I don't think my wife has seen The Rock, so
Oh,
I
fix
need
that.
to. Yeah, we need to cross that off her list. But okay, we'll say that for now. And then what about Independence Day? I mean, obviously the destruction of the White House was like the thing that
I mean, the
this
destruction
movie
in
was.
general. I mean, like with all the locations that you see get blasted by the alien spaceships. I mean, because the New York one, it blasts right through the. Is the Empire State Building or is it the Chrysler Building?
Man, I can't remember. I know it's like the US Bank building in LA, but I don't remember what building it is specifically in New York. But yeah, so like that is kind of almost more of a trailer moment to me than like I guess
No,
it I
no,
guess it was pretty.
that's a big set piece because like that's a big moment where like all the ships open up and like the beam comes down and because it's an endless wave of destruction that just blasts through the entire city.
Yeah, I guess we're getting into like a fundamental definition of what this is, because like in my mind these set piece moments are kind of more like what are our heroes doing, and those moments the heroes are doing nothing. They're just kind of like trying to escape or watching or like running around in the after in the consequences of what
It's the
happened, the
Empire
after
State
effects of
Building,
what
by the
happened.
way.
Okay. So yeah, it was like it was an incredible set piece in terms of like what CG was capable of at the time. So I guess it qualifies on that level. Is there anything
Well,
else
honestly,
from Independent? I
what's
mean,
especially great about that though is they didn't use CG for those for the building explosions. They used miniatures.
that's true. That's true. I mean, like the laser beams and stuff like that coming out of the alien ships is what I was thinking of. But yes, that's true. They did blow up actual physical props, and you could
Yeah,
tell that like the tactile nature of that stuff and the way that like the flames work and the little pieces blasting out everywhere, like it just feels a lot different.
honestly, because the I actually think that the New York moment is the one that's the biggest one because the White House one is like that's the image that everyone thinks of, and I think it's because that's the image that was like on the cover of the VHS box and like it has always been like associated with Independence Day because the White House just getting blown up with a ship above it. But that's a pretty quick moment comparatively to New York because the White House stuff it happens as the president and his staff and Goldblum and whatnot are evacuating, and they barely get away from Washington before the
Mhm.
blast actually goes off. So like, if we're gonna consider like a set piece, and in this case, I think it's because Independence Day has such a big scale. Like the
Yeah.
set piece really is just like these major cities getting blasted by massive alien ships.
Yeah. I was thinking also of the climactic battle against the mothership and like when all of those alien ships start pouring out and it
Yeah,
was just like chaos in the skies. I remember the experience of sitting in the theater and being like, oh my God, our heroes are screwed because
yeah.
the numbers are just like so overwhelming at this point. And I remember just being on the edge of my seat, seeing how, the rest of the story played out from there. But all right, so let's go back around. We have two more categories here. So supporting cast, the supporting cast of Twister, we've talked about this, is incredible. I mean, obviously
All
Helen
time
Hunt and
great.
Bill Paxton, yeah, leading the charge here. But Carrie Elways, Jamie Gertz, Lois Smith as Aunt Meg. You've got Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jeremy Davies, Todd Field,
Alan Ruck.
Alan Ruck, yes, of course. And then, yeah, you've also got Patrick Fischler in there too. I mean, I want to say Jake Busey is in the mix as well. Zach Grenier.
I only just recently noticed Jake Busey in this movie. For whatever reason, I never realized it was him. Again, he only gets like one line where they really focus on him, I think.
Yeah, very small role there. But what would you say? I mean, you said all time great. This has got to be a 10 out of 10 supporting cast, right?
I think so. I mean, just the mere presence of Philip Seymour Hoffman alone makes this like a 10 out of 10 because his character Dusty is just incredible.
Okay, so Mission Impossible. Obviously, Tom Cruise got John Voight in there. You've got Emmanuel Barrett, you've got Henry Czerny, Jean Reno, Ving Rhames, Vanessa Redgrave, Kristen Scott Thomas, Emilio Estevez, briefly. Those are kind of the big names there. I would say those names, while they're great in this movie, maybe not quite as legendary as Twister. What do you think?
I don't know because I mean around this time like those were all pretty big names like people like Vanessa Redgrave and Kristen Scott Thomas were like kind of at the top of their game like they're
Yeah.
better known for like their dramatic work and stuff like that but like yeah I mean this is a spectacular cast so I feel
All right,
like
let's give them a 10 as well.
yeah let's do it.
Okay. All right. The Rock. We've got Sean Connery and Nick Cage leading the charge here. We've got Ed Harris as the villain. Supporting cast: Michael Biehn, William Forsythe, David Morse, John C. McGinley, Tony Todd, Bokeem Woodbine, Claire Forlani, and Danny Nucci. I mean, that's like a pretty impressive cast of that guys too. Like maybe our audience might not immediately know somebody like David Morse by name, but
But you
if
know him
you
when you
look at a
see him.
picture of him, yeah, you absolutely know this guy and his work. So this is like, I guess you could call it maybe a slightly more obscure collection of character actors here, but they're also, that doesn't mean that they're any worse. So I don't know. What do you
Yeah,
think here?
I think maybe this one is a 9 because the star power isn't quite as big maybe.
Okay. All right, so now we're into Independence Day, and this one has an incredibly stacked cast. I mean, just like a huge, sprawling number of people. So obviously, Will Smith and Bill Pullman and Jeff Goldblum are kind of the triumvirate at the top of the triangle here. But you got Mary McDonnell, Judd Hirsch, Robert Loggia, Randy Quaid, Vivica A. Fox, James Rebhorn, Harvey Fierstein, Adam Baldwin, Brent Spiner, Harry Connick Jr., a young Mae Whitman is in the mix as well.
Hmm.
Does this automatically get a 10 just because there are so many people? Like it's more sprawling. It's more there are more people in this movie than there are in any of the other movies. But I don't know. What do you think about it?
I mean, they're all great though too. So like, yeah, maybe this is the one where like they just all get big scores. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So now we're down to our final category here. Let's go in reverse order just to mix things up. So, Independence Day, the 1996-iness of Independence Day. Is there like a moment that jumps out to you, or a plot line, or a character, or something about this movie that really screams 1996 that might weigh our discussion in one way or another?
Welcome to Earth, baby.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking like just the idea of aliens coming to Earth and the people responding in the way that they do, like folks holding up signs and being like, take me first, and like that whole thing. It kind of felt like there was something in the air in 1996, or in the mid 90s anyway, maybe not specifically in 96, but where that kind of thing was more on people's minds. I don't know. It feels like we would have a lot different reaction today as a culture than we did in as depicted in the events of this movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that's like the definitive response. Welcome to Earth and the alien reactions. I don't know. I guess those are the two
The
that we've got for
the
now. But
use of computers and that whole virus thing is probably also a very 1996 thing, because like we're at a point where like people had the computers and like were using them, but they also weren't like anywhere nearly as knowledgeable about computers as we are today. And so like
yeah,
something that simple, people are going to be like, oh yeah, people aren't going to know that this isn't like possible or doesn't make sense, like whatever.
yeah, that's true. It was, I mean, maybe not pre-internet, but certainly pre-internet as we know it now, and like it was kind of like AOL era or something, if you even want to call it that, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, so now back to The Rock, the 1996ness of the Rock. I'm trying to think. I mean, um, God, I wish I would have rewatched this movie before we did this podcast. This is the part of the bad part about just like pressing record on a conversation like this without having time to really go into research. But do you remember anything about this movie that really jumps out as like I guess like the idea of declassifying who shot JFK? Like that kind of seemed like, because Oliver Stone's JFK movie came out like around this time too. That seemed like that was something that was definitely like on the public consciousness. You know, this is pre
Yeah.
9/11, pre war on terror. So like the country was in a different place and was maybe focused on different preoccupations and stuff. So I don't know if that qualifies. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and honestly, like it's one of those things too, where like Michael Bay's filmmaking style in the '90s around this time is just very much like of the '90s. You know, like he's he's changed somewhat as far as his like visual style, but there's something about just like the way a Michael Bay movie looks in the '90s that like you can just you can tell immediately. You know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a good answer. So the Bayhem of 1996. All right, back to Mission Impossible. The most 1996 thing about Mission Impossible. I mean, maybe it's like the email to Max and like what the screen looks like, what the graphics look like when he's going through and like searching for the Job Bible verse and sending off those messages and stuff to these different
Oh yeah,
people. That's
the way he uses email is extremely '90s. Like it is very very silly.
anything else about the movie? Nothing glaring is coming to mind. I watched this one relatively recently. Um, anything jumping out at you?
No, not really. Not specifically. No, not like '90s esque. I guess the heist kind of seems like it's kind of like specific to the '90s, but it also ties into like the computer stuff too, of like having this one computer terminal stashed away like in a room that is only accessible by one person with like an eye scan and a key card. And
Mhm.
um you know, like the all that technology stuff like that is very much like tied into like what was considered state of the art as far as like the '90s is concerned. So
Yeah, I agree. That's a good one. All right, Twister. The most 1996 thing about Twister. Hmm. What do you think? I just watched this not too long ago, but um, the way like maybe the outfits, like some of the costumes.
the soundtrack is very '90s.
Oh yeah, that Van Halen song,
Yeah.
"Humans Being." Yes, that's true. The soundtrack, that's a good one. Anything else from Twister?
No, again, that's another one too, where like that movie just like has '90s vibes, like a like disaster movies were kind of big at the time, you know, because like you had Twister, you had the volcano movies like Dante's Peak and Volcano.
Hmm.
You had like stuff like Hard Rain had come out, you know, stuff specifically focused on like weather phenomenon and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I guess like the fact that the villain was nature, like maybe that's the most 1996 about thing about it. Okay, so what do we have here, Brad? What does this all mean? What does this boil down to for you? Is that did the science that we applied to this have any sort of bearing at all on what you think the best summer blockbuster from 1996 actually is.
No.
What an experiment. Okay, well, you win some, you lose some. What are you going to do? Okay, so I love that. We've been through 40 minutes of talking about this, and it's just like, nah, no, didn't do anything. All right, so then let's cut all of this and have a 2-minute podcast that just picks up from this point that says gut reaction, Brad, based on nothing but vibes. What is your winner of the summer 1996 best blockbuster?
I think that the winner is probably Independence Day. I feel like it's the one that like it's on the biggest scale. It has has plenty of like memorable quotes, big memorable set pieces. It has that huge cast. Um, like and especially if we're talking about like summer blockbusters, like man, that is like a summer blockbuster because it's 4th of July, it's Independence Day, baby, it's all summer.
You know what? I think you're right. I think Independence Day, I would not say is the best movie of the 4 that we've narrowed down
Oh
here,
no, yeah,
but
I agree with that for sure.
But I think it does qualify as the best summer blockbuster of 1996 for all the reasons that you just said. I think you're right. I think it's got that scope, and that kind of changed the game in some ways. Like there are a ton of different movies that followed in the wake of Independence Day that tried to capture that same type of thing. And obviously there had been disaster movies and things like that in the 70s, and like Irwin Allen and all of those kinds of, Towering Inferno and Poseidon Adventure and all that kind of stuff. There had been movies like this before, but Independence Day sort of supercharged it for the 90s and for like the modern era. And it feels like a lot of, all of the other Roland Emmerich movies where he kind of, he's sort of staked out a corner of the blockbuster sphere in making movies like this. And this was like kind of like his big, what had he done before this? Like Stargate and maybe a couple other things, but nothing on this level.
Yeah.
And then this movie kind of like set the bar for what a Roland Emmerich and what a disaster movie across Hollywood would look like. And he seems to have just been chasing the success of this movie and the sort of pure alchemy of this movie ever since in his career to varying degrees of success, like The Day After Tomorrow and movies like 2012 and things like that, 10,000 BC. Like I think none of them worked as well as it did in Independence Day, when sort of everything came together in the right mixture, and this movie sort of hit everybody in the right point in their career for all to work out really well too. Like it's just so pleasurable to watch. I mean, it's very silly, but yeah, there's something about it that just makes it really, really enjoyable to watch, and in that kind of like perfect summer Americana type of way, where it just feels like you should be like drinking a cold beer and like eating a hamburger while you watch the movie, poolside or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It is pure America summer blockbuster nonsense in the best way. So, all right, Brad. Well, I think we've done it. The science played had no redeeming value whatsoever. So I appreciate you going through that journey with me on a whim here on an episode where
this reminds me too that like one thing I hope that we can do, and we've discussed in behind the scenes here at Slash Film, is the same way that we've done like our big podcast episodes where we try and figure out the like movie moments of the year, or like the best movies of the year, is like having doing the same thing for other years when Slash Film wasn't a site, like digging back into like 1995 or 96, or back in the 80s, or going back to like 2004 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be really fun. I have no idea what the planning for something like that would look like, but maybe if we start now, we can knock out at least one of those types of episodes like before the end of this year or something like that.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone who stuck with us and listened to this complete nonsense that we're making up as we were going along. Normally the show is a little bit more structured than this, but I appreciate you listening. I appreciate Brad for playing along with me. I just like sprung this on him at the last minute with zero prep. So, all right. You can find more about pretty much all of these movies that we've talked about on today's episode at slashfilm.com. Just check out the archives of the website. I will try to link to a couple things in the show notes as well. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That does help us out a lot. Don't forget also to tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you.